Rule number one, don't open the door.
I need a little more up top and a little less down below.
Amber alert. Oh, God, something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. Something's going to happen. In orbit of Uranus.
It smells.
I don't even want to talk about it.
Oh, no, you love me. You know you love me.
Just don't let it touch the...
You know, that's great, but give me a little more.
Why? Why are you shooting at me?
You can't start the car. Johnny has the keys.
Hello, hello, hello out there in YouTube and podcast land. You have reached Johnny Has the Keys, where we talk about key influences of horror and science fiction movies and those little references that sometimes lift them above others and sometimes just make them distinctly known for other reasons. Oh, my name is Tim. I'm here with my co-host, David. This is a podcast that I feel like I need to explain every once in a while. David and I have known each other for a very long time, but we haven't lived in the same state for a very long time. We still talk movies, both science fiction and horror, and we thought, what would it be like to broaden the scope of those movies? So we cover over a century's worth of movies. We pick one or two to do weekly, and we elaborate on them for your entertainment sometimes, maybe hopefully maybe abuse. I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, this is my co-host, David. How are you doing today, David?
I'm doing well, Tim. Thank you for that intro and explanation. And we also should explain that we don't script any of this. This is totally our conversation. We pick a topic. The topic is known ahead of time, but we each do our own research. We each come up with our own questions, our own thoughts, yada, yada, and we don't even discuss that prior to beginning the recording. So it's all, off the cuff, a conversation, and we would love to have conversations with you guys. So if you have thoughts, comments, questions, make sure you put them down below and let us know. We'd love to respond to you. And normally we talk with we start with what have you been doing genre related in the past week? And I did something kind of fun. I stumbled upon it, actually. It was kind of interesting. I was YouTubing because I hear that's a thing now. With the kids, they just watch the YouTubes all day long.
No, my husband does too.
Yeah, and I was just kind of there and seeing what came up, and I was doing some sci-fi research for something we have coming up, but I stumbled upon UFO Season 2. So I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, but people may not know, but there was a series, British television series called UFO, came out in the late mid-90s.
60s, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't 60s. It was trying to remember. Let me look up my dates and find out.
I may be thinking of something else, but it seems like there was a UFO way back when.
It was Gary and Sylvia Anderson, who were the same people that originally had done Thunderbirds in the 50s. So all the marionette stuff that you used to hear about was them. This was in 1970. The year 1970.
Yeah, there was one more recent in 2018 and 2021, but the one I was thinking about was that one, 70.
Right. And it was a great series. I ended up getting it on DVD as soon as it was available, and then on Blu-ray again as soon as it was available, because it was just a really unique look. Anyway, they had started with their own studio in England in the 50s and the 60s doing the Thunderbirds, which was marionette puppets, which ended up influencing the guys that did South Park to do their
Team America
movie.
Yeah,
everything else very similar to that. But their second series was called UFO, and it was about an organization called Shadow, the Supreme Headquarters Alien Defense Organization. And they were this covert black ops organization that was all over the world. Anyway, and they were fighting this UFO menace of these UFO aliens that were landing, and they were body harvesting and, abducting people and all of this. Well, they had several assets and resources. They used one of them was a moon base. And I always remembered it because, especially in 1970, the Moonbase girls were very, very attractive, and they were, Roddenberry inspired miniskirts, but silver, lame costumes and all this. I just always thought it was really, excellent
Sure
casting.
you did.
Loved it. Anyway, the series got canceled after one season. So the BBC said, no, we're done with it. That's okay. We don't need it anymore. So so I stumbled across this documentary talking about season 2 of UFO. And I thought there was no season 2 of UFO. What are they talking about? Turns out the BBC recanted its cancellation and said, hey, we do want you to do a second season. Well, they had already destroyed all the sets, sold all the costumes, done everything, whatever. So they said, okay, but we'll have to reimagine, we'll have to rebuild, we'll have to redo something because everything's gone. The cast has other commitments. We'll have to redo it. So they ended up going into pre-production for this. They were going to set it on the moon base instead of on Earth, like UFO season 1 was. So season 2 was going to be set primarily on the moon base. So they built the whole moon base sets. They did all this pre-production, yada, yada. Finally, it came down to it, and they met with the executives and said, we can't do UFO, the series. We can't. We this is not like it. But we have an idea for another series. But we're going to set it totally different, and we're going to call it Space 1999.
I knew you were going to say that.
And I never had heard of this pre-production. It was great. It was really interesting. But they were talking about casting Martin Landau, casting Barbara Bain, going for it, yada, yada, all this stuff. It was a very unique documentary. Anyway, it was out there. It's on.
But that wasn't British, was it?
Well, they switched part of it to America, but no, it was a British television series. Yes,
really, because it doesn't seem like a British television show to me.
Well, okay. They cast Martin Landau and Barbara Bain because they needed an American audience.
Okay,
so but if you'll notice the doctor in it, Maya, all the 2 of the pilots that were the leads regulars, they were Australian. So yeah, it was a very British series. And that's what I did my genre week. I got to learn something new about UFO, the series.
Well, as soon as you said they built a moon base, I was like, this is Space 1999. This is Space 1999. I know it is. Huh. Interesting. Wow. Well, ironically enough, this week in my genre week, I tiptoed into your genre a bit with a little movie called No One Will Save You.
No One Will Save You. Oh, that's the one I've heard about, but I haven't seen.
This one kind of took Hulu by storm a while back. And I kept hearing people say things about it. I read Stephen King was kind of raving about it. I was like, I need to check this out. I have nothing but praise for this film. It's written and directed by a guy named Brian Duffield, who I had never heard of. It's one of his first films. He was more of a writer up until this point. He did movies called Spontaneous, and he did that show, The Babysitter. I did not like The Babysitter, and Spontaneous is on our list, or on my list anyway. However, this one stars Caitlin Dever. We recognize her from Booksmart. She is phenomenal in this movie. It only stars a couple of other people in very small roles because it is primarily a tour de force of her in her home by herself. I've got in my notes that I would definitely include this on our list of movies for our show. Can you tell I'm trying not to reveal anything?
Good. No, please don't. I don't know anything about it.
It's like an instant classic. It pays homage to very well known and cherished Twilight Zone episodes. And like I said, I just don't want to say too much more without spoiling it. A quick synopsis. Bryn finds her solace within the walls of her home where she grew up until awakened one night by strange noises from unearthly intruders. The movie only scores 82% on Rotten Tomatoes. I would give it a hard 90 for sure.
Okay.
This movie rocks. And I guess you may already know one thing, and this is not really a spoiler, about this movie that makes it unique. Do you know what that is about it?
No, the only thing I know at all is headlines that I keep seeing, I remember seeing online about how do you create suspense or tension with little to no dialogue.
That's it. There's no
So there was a
dialogue.
lot of that. There's very limited dialogue in the movie, if any. That's the only thing I know about. And now I don't know why, whether she's deaf or mute or whatever, yada
She's
yada, or
not.
something, or I don't know the reasons, but I do know that he said this is a director's tour de force. I've read about people. I remember reading about people. Yeah,
it's very. There's very little dialogue. There is incidental dialogue, but it's like throwaways. And the reason is not because she's deaf. It's just because she lives there alone. So she's trying to be quiet because there's an invader in her house, pretty much.
Right. Who's she going to talk to?
But this has elements of like 10 Cloverfield Lane. It has strong influence from that Agnes Moorehead episode of The Twilight Zone, called The Invaders, I believe. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I highly recommend this movie, folks. If you have not seen this, you need to go to Hulu right now and watch it.
Wow.
And that's all I'll say.
I will definitely check it out and see.
Yeah. I'm not
and you
sure
delved into science fiction. Look at you. So that's good for you.
I did, but there is no segue really for what we're covering today.
Well, no,
it's
not
a double
really,
feature.
because it's a double feature. It's big. Yeah. It's two classic films of science fiction. We are going to cover, in case you just clicked on this by accident and didn't see a title or whatever, we are doing a double feature of dystopian literature-based cinema. We are doing Francis Truffaut's Fahrenheit 451, based on the novel by Ray Bradbury. And then we are jumping a few years later to Michael Radford's 1984, which came out ironically in 1984, based on the novel by George Orwell. I think we should probably take them in distribution order, let's say, whatever. So we'll take Fahrenheit first and kind of delve into it, and then into 84. At the same time, I'm sure we'll be talking about comparisons between each, because they both were huge influences on each other, so to speak. Anyway, had you seen either of these before?
Nope.
No, are you serious?
I have not seen either one of them.
Wow. Interesting. Well, then I would love to get your take on Fahrenheit. What did you think of Fahrenheit?
Wow. First of all, I liked Fahrenheit. I liked both films for different reasons, but I also disliked them for the same reason. So
that's a good point then.
The reason I dislike them, and we have talked about this before in the last dystopian movie we covered, I am not a dystopian fan. Dystopian movies kind of bore me. It seems like it's always, people in a societal prison, and it's a really drab and dreary vision. And I'm a little bored by that. That being said, I liked Fahrenheit 451 slightly better because it was Francois Truffaut, and it was very quirky and bright and funny in places and bizarre. So it held my interest more than 84 did. 84 to me was better visually, but we'll get to that later.
Okay. So. That's interesting, because we have talked about dystopians before that you did like you like all the Mad Maxes. You like a dystopian that's a far future dystopia, maybe,
or that are violent action.
You like post-apocalyptic. You don't like dystopia.
That's exactly what it is. That's why I like zombie films, and that's why I like Mad Max. Yeah.
Well, curious, because I kind of wanted to start by talking about dystopias. And I uncovered a little thing, which I would love for people out there, if you're familiar with dystopian literature, especially, challenge us on this or see. But I was trying to do some research because, in Keys, we talked about key influences and what were they. And when I typed up dystopian literature, it came up with We, which was written by a guy named Yevgeny Zamyatin in 1924. It is cited by both George Orwell and Aldous Huxley as huge influences on their novels. It was a novel written called We, and some people say that it was the first dystopian novel. However, doing more research, I found that in 1879, there was a novel called The Machine Stops, written by E.M. Forster, which was dystopian.
E.M. Forster surprisingly wrote science fiction and horror. That always kind of blows my mind because he's known as like British literature, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the little Easter egg or the golden nugget I found was there was actually a novel that was written in 1826 by Mary Shelley called The Last Man, which was a dystopian society based. And it was actually, it didn't come up in any of my other research, like when we were talking about Omega Man and everything, but it is this sole survivor of a horrible war. In hers, it is caused by the Black Plague being spread throughout the world.
Well, and what year was that?
1826. It was only 8 years after Frankenstein.
But you're leaving out one that goes even further back that's more famous.
Which one?
The Utopia book by Thomas More.
But Utopia is not dystopian. It is utopian.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So the theory I posit is Mary Shelley is known for creating the first science fiction novel, meaning Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
This could then also be the first dystopian novel too, credited to the same author.
How interesting. She was,
which is very interesting. She was, and still had to publish in different ways so that no one knew she was a female. So, sadly, Fahrenheit. So anyway, those are dystopians, and the typical tradition of dystopian is exactly what you said. It's usually a bleak story from the very beginning. It's societal oppression of some kind, and how either the protagonist fits into that world, rebels against that world, does both, whatever. But that's the essential issues of a dystopian story. And it's hugely popular in science fiction as a subgenre, and also it's been made into dozens and dozens of films.
Well, it's also hugely popular in young adult science fiction now, as far as the Hunger Games and books like that. Yeah.
Yep. It's their way of rebelling against society or showing society's evils. Kind of thing. Yeah, that's a really good one. I hadn't, I've got it in I've got Hunger Games in my keys, but I don't have the other stuff like all the YA novels. But that's a good point.
I mean, I don't know them that well, but I've seen them just on the bookshelves, and I know they're popular.
Oh yeah.
I would have to do a Google search though to name any, probably. So
well, like what was the one that I just started, Maze Runner.
Yeah, that's one right there.
Yeah, and then the other ones that came out a few years ago, not Inception, but they had the weird single titles like Redemption or whatever, and there was 4 novels. They only made like 3 movies, and they stopped, and everybody was pissed off because the series didn't continue. It starred like the girl with the unique name, Shiloh Woodley or Woolley. Anyway, I don't know it right now off the bat, but that was a series of YA novels as well.
Okay.
But getting back, so that's the overall mystique in the genre. So getting to the dystopians, I think it's interesting. You said it's quirkier.
It's very quirky. It's a strange movie.
It works on, what I thought would be really interesting. This is what was happening on Earth while Barbarella was in space. It has that same kind of French feel to it that Badham did. And I think but what's noteworthy is this was Truffaut's first English film. It's also his first color film. He had only done black and white prior to this. So he wanted a lot of color to it. And you can tell through it all.
What's funny is also his idea of like a futuristic fire truck. It just looks so strange. It doesn't even look like a real vehicle. It looks like something fake.
Yeah. Yeah, using that, the monorails for all the transportation sort of thing was interesting. It's a very 60s vibe, of course. You know, the aesthetic is a very 66 vibe. This is even predating Star Trek, but we still had, that same sort of bizarre material for all the costuming, the unique look, and that juxtaposed to the rebels, who all look like they're living in the 50s. The old house, the old library, the old apartments, all of that kind of stuff. So I thought that was very interesting, the way he subliminally said that the book people are different than the modern society they're living in.
Yes. And that would be another reason why I appreciate this movie a little more, is because I appreciate Bradbury more than I do Orwell. And books do speak to me. And there is more of an upending in this movie than there is in 1984 too.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of my things about the aesthetic from the very beginning of 1984, there is no hope, and there never will be. And that's the thing of the novel's the same way. So in this, Bradbury does have that little hook at the end of hope sort of thing, that the literature will be kept alive. I also think I love both of these movies, but I also tend to like the elements of Fahrenheit that are passionate to me, which is the fact that Bradbury picked literature, and that's the crime. And of course, one of the big keys inspired me was any kind of book burning, any kind of literature destruction throughout history. Yeah, which is so timely now, isn't it? Amazing.
I mean, it's always been there, but right now it's more prominent. Yeah.
I was listening to Wait, Don't Tell Me a few weeks ago, and they had, just in back episodes on the podcast, and they had an episode where one of the people that called in was a elementary librarian in Florida. And they all immediately went, "Oh my God, you're on the front lines." And one of the guests said, "How's that one book in the library doing?" And it's just sad.
It is sad.
The novel was written in 1953. So what is that, 70 years ago? And it's still going on. Parts of our society still think they should censor books, burn books, ban books, get rid of books, take them away because real thinking people shouldn't be influenced by these books. It's just a horrifying thought that a society would then embrace that and then actually have an entire force that goes out, and what they do is destroy literature. It's just, it just gives you shivers to think about it. So you hadn't seen it before. Did you find it interesting when you found out what the title meant?
Well, I mean, I know the title, what it means because of the book itself, that it's the temperature at which paper burns.
Right. Yeah. I always just thought that was really cool when I read it as a kid. I thought, ooh, that's cool.
Well, I think that's how Bradbury discovered it. He just went, oh, that'd make a great title when he read that. And that's where the idea either came from or where the idea for the title came from. I think the concept came from the title, though.
Were there scenes that you liked? Particular scenes?
I'm trying to think of what scenes really stick out in my mind. I would say the main scene that sticks out is the scene where his wife is having the gathering of her friends, and he basically stops their little meeting and forces them to listen to him reading a book.
Yeah.
And the one breaks down crying. Yeah. I love that.
I think that's a great scene. I think the opening, of course, is good because it establishes the whole movie so well. But I also like the scene with I always have locked on the image. And again, we've talked about how Kubrick, researches so much and has these images that just burn into your brain and they never go away. I think the scene with the woman standing in that huge pile of books, and they're really burning her and the books alive as they burn her whole house down. That's such an iconic.
Actually, she's the one that sets herself on fire, isn't she?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She doesn't let them do it. She does it.
Right. She does it. And I always wondered, and I wanted to go back and do it in research, and I didn't. I wondered what book she was. I wonder if she was one of the books, or if she was just, a librarian, essentially, since she had the whole attic full of books.
Well, I mean, she wouldn't be one yet if she wasn't living in that little commune that he escapes to at the end.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you have to be in the commune to be a book. I assume so. I know in the novel you were. They were in an enclave, separated, and they were just keeping it alive.
It's been a very long time since I've read either one of these books, and I really didn't want to revisit them. I know I've been doing that a lot for this season, but these two I did not reread.
And did you, I was trying to think, I was looking at my questions.
Sure.
Trivia? Any trivia from it?
Well, I mean, I have a little bit of stuff that I can talk about before I get into cast. Well, first of all, I didn't know much about Francois Truffaut, except that we talked about him in our Close Encounters of the Third Kind episode, because Spielberg cast him as a character in that movie. Apparently, he was a big Alfred Hitchcock fan, considered him a master. Warren Beatty chose him to direct Bonnie and Clyde, but he turned it down, which I thought was interesting as well, because that would have put him on the map a little more, probably. I mean, we know, of course, Bonnie and Clyde was directed by what's his face,
George Orwell. George Orwell?
No. Wasn't it Sam Peckinpah or something? It was somebody that was like violent. I can't remember who it was. Anyway, somebody's going to send me a note about that.
Yeah, they will.
Anyway, it was also written by Francois, who had never really, he had always dismissed science fiction and thought it was just, child's play. And then he read, someone recommended the book. He read it and was just fascinated with it and obsessed and like spent years gathering or raising money to make this film, which he made for like $1.5 million, and it only grossed like 11,000 the first weekend. So it was like a terrible flop. Yep. But now in retrospect, if you look back at all the Fahrenheit movies, including the one that came out in 2018, this is the highest ranked as far as being the best version of it so far. And there's been like, I want to say between 3 and 5 versions of it, maybe now.
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, it's hard to find. If you would like to revisit it, do some research. Do not get the 2019 remake.
2018. Yeah. It's got the, I can't think of the black actor that's in it.
The one from Black Panther.
I can see his face, but I can't think of his name.
Yeah.
Anyway, I read that it was just horrible. And that's why when I was choosing the films for this double feature, I went with this one because it got higher rankings.
Of course.
Bernard Herrmann does the music.
Yeah.
I was shocked when I found that out, and I thought, you know what? I need to look at something. And this makes the 5th movie we've covered that Bernard Herrmann did the music for. He's become one of our like directors that we revisit because, I mean, Herrmann is so present in so many movies.
Yes. But I will say that it's one of the things that kind of pulls me out of it. I do not like his theme for this movie. I like his incidental music, but I don't like the theme. The theme to me sounds like all of Bernard Herrmann's later Hitchcock soundtracks.
Yeah, it's like his signature.
Yeah, with the strident violin in the back, and then that overriding da 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 da. Very,
you're doing Psycho.
Yeah, it's that same kind of sound, and it's in Vertigo, and it's in
Reanimator. It is. Yeah. They actually credit him, even though they didn't have him compose it. But yeah, what else? So that was some of the background stuff I have on the film. Did you have any other scenes before we move on to cast?
No, I think those are the scenes that are in, and the ending. I love the way, especially those of us who love literature. I like the way he did the pan of the enclave, like you said, at the end, and people are coming into frame and out of frame, and we're hearing these snatches of classic literature as they repeat it to themselves to keep it alive.
And instead of names, their names are titles of books.
Yeah,
which is fabulous. And the main character, what's his name? I forgot. Guy Montag. Montag. He says it a million times. Montag.
Well, they also refer to him by the last name in third person all the time. Montag wants this. Montag likes this.
And it's like, oh, stop saying the word Montag. Anyway, Montag is Tales of Mystery and the Imagination by Edgar Allan Poe, isn't he? That's what he is at the end. Yeah, I love that. That was great.
But you do know that the book ends differently. In the book, there's actually a war, and in the book, the city is actually destroyed with nuclear weapons, and Montag barely survives. In the movie, I like the fact that he kind of gives the impression, similar to when we get to 1984, that the war really isn't real. The war is not going on. That's all propaganda.
Right.
To keep the populace entertained, kind of thing. But in the novel, it's true. It's real. And there really is a war, and the entire city is destroyed. And luckily Montag escapes and finds the enclave and has the ending similar.
Right. So, and I guess that, like, again, that's another one of the reasons why I like this movie better, is that there is a little bit of hope at the end.
Well, and you tend to like that even in your zombie ones too. You like hope at the end, usually.
It
in
depends.
most stories.
I mean, I love Night of the Living Dead, and they kill the main character at the end. But I also love Dawn of the Dead when they fly away and you think they may escape. So I mean, there's good in both. But in
28 days later,
so exactly, and there's a little bit of hope in that as well. In this one, there's definitely some hope, and I didn't remember the differences between it and the book, so I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah,
because Ray Bradbury just nuked them, I guess.
Well, society itself, because he and I read a little blurb in doing the research that he actually stated one time that he wanted to. The reason he did that was because he wanted Montag to be, and this enclave to be, society's hope. They can rebuild now. And there won't be any more firemen. There won't be any more government against them. They have the hope of survival now, sort of thing.
I'm glad. Well, first of all, I meant to mention this earlier on. I've mentioned in the past that there are lots of things we plan for seasons as far as themes and motifs, but then there's lots of things that happen that are happy accidents, like the fact that we covered 4 Richard Mathesons, 3 in a row this season. But I mentioned back when we did the Illustrated Man that was the first Bradbury we've ever covered, and lo and behold, we're doing another one right now, so we have a little bit of a Bradbury thing going as well.
Bradbury-esque is happening.
Right. If we had Something Wicked This Way Comes, I'd be floored, but it's not on there. Sorry, folks. In the future, maybe. Should I move on to cast then?
Yeah.
Okay. Mentioned Warren Beatty, so let's talk about Julia Christie.
Wow.
She was involved with him at one point. One of the controversial things I have read about this film, and I will get into it when we get into a little bit more trivia, is the fact that Julia Christie plays 2 roles in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
What did you feel about that?
That's one of my first questions under my notes for cast for Tim was, how did you feel about Julia Christie being dual cast?
I think it was a mistake.
I do too. I think even if the part was smaller, to have her play she
plays one of the rebels, and then she plays Linda Montag, Montag's wife.
Yes. And I think I read an essay, and they said that perhaps Truffaut was thinking he could show how this was a person with society and against society, same person, how they would be different if they came from different moral constitutions or looked at society differently, kind of thing. That's a little
too philosophical.
And I thought that's too much. If that was the reason, it's too much. And it still, to me, doesn't work in the movie. It actually pulls me out of certain scenes because I go, wait, that's her doing an acting job rather than I'm invested in that character kind of thing. And I think a different actress would have worked for that better.
Yeah. And it's not much of an acting job. It's really just a wig change.
Yeah. Yeah. Really. Same accent, same dialogue, everything. So I thought that was an issue. I did find it very interesting. He cast her. I think it was really great. She had just come off of Zhivago, and, which blew her up internationally.
She was a huge star at the time.
And then to suddenly do this, was interesting, I think. And I've always liked her. I've liked her. And, like you said, she did develop the Warren Beatty era. So she was like in Shampoo and Heaven Can Wait and all those that I really liked in the 80s.
She's also a very good genre actress. She was in Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland, as well as Demon Seed, the Kuntz movie we always refer to, where a woman is basically held prisoner by her computerized home. And then lastly, she was in Hamlet, the Kenneth Branagh version. She played Gertrude. So, I mean, she's definitely a good actress. I just didn't find her that compelling in this.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yep. I think she could have been better. You're right. She was very hot, though, because she was in Dr. Zhivago, which was a huge hit. One of the roles that she was playing was actually offered to Jane Fonda. And I think that would have been interesting to pair them up.
Agreed. It would have been nice. It would have been better, I think, overall.
What else?
And she was definitely the big draw in this, although I do think Oscar Werner is really strong in this. Really well cast. And I think
I didn't know him.
No, I had not known him before watching this movie when it came out.
Me either. And I was like, who is Oscar Werner? We'll go ahead and move on to him because that's really all I had on Julia Christie anyway. He is known for two movies, Ship of Fools and Jules and Jim. Jules and Jim was also directed by Francois, and Ship of Fools may have been as well. But Jules and Jim definitely was. Oscar Werner, I don't know why I have his name just there. Anyway, other people that were considered for this role besides Oscar Werner were Marlon Brando. We always seem to come to him in the mid 70s,
60s,
or mid 60s. Yeah. Paul Newman, Jean-Paul Belmondo, and Charles Aznavour, I don't know, two French guys. Peter O'Toole and Terrence Stamp were all considered for the role of Montag. Terrence Stamp.
I could see Terrence Stamp.
Absolutely. And he was actually cast as Montag and dropped out when he heard that Julia Christie, his former lover, was going to be playing two roles. And he felt that would overshadow him, and he left.
Okay.
So Terrence Stamp out. Apparently Montgomery Clift also passed on this role.
He would have been great.
That's interesting, I think. Yeah, I mean, you didn't see him in a lot of genre picks at all, even though he was popular in the 50s and 60s. Paul Newman was apparently cast at one point too and dropped out because he wanted the film to be more political and sociological, and that Truffaut refused. Truffaut refused, I guess.
I mean, maybe wanting it more. I don't know. That's interesting because I think it very much is political. Maybe he wanted it less oblique, more overt, maybe, or something.
I think he probably, wanted it less artsy. You know, he's American. Ray Bradbury's American. He probably wanted it to be more of an American film. And Truffaut, is a French director.
Talk about the evil commies or whatever. Yeah. In the 60s.
Werner and Truffaut notoriously did not get along during the filming of this. I found that interesting because he had obviously done other films with Truffaut. Why this movie did all of a sudden they not like each other? And did you dig? I could not find any information.
The only thing I had seen was there was a controversy about certain, and it was just like a 2-line in an essay about they fought often over scene interpretation. So I'm assuming it has to deal with what Truffaut was wanting for the visual eye and what Werner was wanting for his character. Is the impression I got, because like you said, they've done other movies together and didn't have any issues. So I think it was very much this is the way I'm approaching this particular movie, and he didn't agree. I guess I think is the impression I got. Yeah.
Did you hear what he did in spite of Truffaut? What he did as like a revenge?
No.
He cut his hair before the final scene was filmed, so it would definitely create a continuity error.
Oh, well,
that's nice. Why his hair looks different at the end. He did that intentionally because he was pissed off.
He needs to not do that again.
For the last 2 weeks, they didn't speak to each other either. So something going on between them two. And I guess that was the last film he did with Truffaut. And from what I understand, Werner descended into alcoholism and didn't have much of a career following. He died young. He died very young. I did
see that. Yeah. Which is a shame. He had a lot of potential, I think.
Yeah, he's got like a Baryshnikov look, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway, Cyril Cusack played Captain Beatty. Kind of over the top, reminded me a little bit of Dr. Bombay from Bewitched. We will see him again very soon.
Yeah.
Because he is also in 1984, the other movie that's part of this episode.
A much better character in 84.
Right.
And
he played Charrington.
Smaller scenes, but really well done in 84.
Right.
Yeah.
We also know him from Day of the Jackal. For the part of the Captain Beatty, others were considered. Very good people, as a matter of fact. Laurence Olivier was considered. Sterling Hayden was considered, and Michael Redgrave was considered. And Michael Redgrave, of course, we talked about when we did The Innocents. Laurence Olivier and Sterling Hayden, I don't recall any genre movies of theirs, really, unless you consider Wuthering Heights. Anyway, Cyril Cusack was hired for that part, and he played it. I only have just bits and pieces on the rest of the cast. Anton Diffring, who played Fabian, the headmistress. Hammers, he was in Hammers, the Man Who Could Cheat Death, if you remember that old B movie from the Hammer Studios.
He was also in a lot of really good war movies. He seemed to always do war.
Dare.
Yeah, I remember him in Where Eagles Dare. I remember him in the Blue Max. He's the other ace in the Blue Max, which is a great movie. And he also had another one I can't remember right now, but I'm trying to think of it. It was another war movie. Anyway, he did a lot of war movies and was really good at it. I like that. I like the way. Before we jump on, I want to go back to Cusack for just a second. I kind of liked the way he played the captain, because you never knew when he was being serious. He did it all with this kind of sarcastic smile the entire time. You know, it's like
that scene where he busts Montag in his office going through his files.
You're going through my office, are you? Yes, Montag. How are you? You know, it's like,
is he mad? Is he not? What's going on here? Yeah.
I love the fact that he kind of gave him this kind of societal oblivion. You know, I don't know what to trust. What you're saying and the way you look is totally different than what I think should be happening. And I kind of liked that. And Fabian, going back to then Diffring, you could tell from the very beginning, he suspected Montag. He didn't trust. I got the impression even in that third scene that he was like the second to Montag, and he really wanted
he was up for the job, the same job. Yeah. They were competitors.
Exactly
I got that.
Yeah, I got that exactly. It was that office politics. I want your job, buddy.
Right. So I'm going to find some dirt on you and get you killed or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
B. Duffel played the book woman that you referred to.
Yeah.
The one that sets herself on fire. Did you recognize her?
I recognized her from she was in Python. She was in Grail. Holy
she
Grail.
is the old crone who is digging with Dennis in the dirt.
Yeah.
Hey, Dennis, there's some lovely filth over here.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw her, I was like, I know that woman.
Yep.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's what we know B from. And then lastly, Alex Scott played the book person that was the life of Henry Brulard. And he was in the movie Romper Stomper, as well as Dr. Hargreaves in The Abominable Dr. Phibes, which we covered last season. All of these are just really good British actors. For such a French film, it's filled with British people and Oscar Werner, who I believe is German or Austrian.
And part of that may have been in the production company wanting a broader reach. Like we said about UFO, they wanted an American audience. So wanting to get into an American market may have been, then we need to broaden away from French actors. We need more British, actors, sort of thing.
Well, and I read that Truffaut did not speak English well when he made this movie. So it was probably his way of directing was more visual because he didn't understand what they were saying.
Yeah. And he's been known. I mean, I think in his autobiography, he even talks about the fact that he still knows very little English. He intentionally doesn't try to learn English. Because remember in Close Encounters, even he had a translator.
Right.
And that's the way he approached not just the character, that's the way Truffaut was. So I thought it was interesting. There's some other parallels which might be interesting to switch us over before we jump into keys. But no, let me save the parallels. We'll just do keys first. How about that?
Well, let me do awards. There's a few. It was nominated for a BAFTA for Best Actress, Christie, which I don't really understand at all. It was nominated for a Hugo for Best Dramatic Presentation. None of these were wins, and it is not on the 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. And I can understand that because it's not a great film. It's a memorable film, but it's not a great film.
Agree.
And then before we go on to keys, I've got a couple of things in trivia. Martin Scorsese called the film underrated and that it influenced many of his films. I just find that funny because David and I have this little side joke you folks out there don't know, but apparently Martin Scorsese's like a closeted horror movie lover that's always out there praising horror movies, but never making them.
Right. Yeah.
So I just, and obviously this is not a horror movie, but it is a genre pick. And then Time Magazine had a scathing article saying that this movie strongly supports the widely held suspicion that Julia Christie actually cannot act, and that though she plays two women of divergent dispositions, they seem in her portrayal to differ only in hairdos.
Just what we said.
So, yeah, Time did not like it. Now, Ray Bradbury has said in interviews that despite its flaws, he was pleased with the film and that he's particularly pleased with the climax, which is my favorite thing, where the book people are walking through the snowy countryside, reciting the books that they are or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
He too thinks the main mistake with this movie was giving Julia Christie two roles. So that we all tend to agree there. And then lastly, and this just horrifies me, and I have to say it, but Mel Gibson planned a remake of this, which Frank Darabont scripted and was going to feature either Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt in it, but it never got the go ahead. And I'm like, thank God, because I don't think I could stomach a Mel Gibson movie with Tom Cruise in it.
No, that would be a double out for you.
Yes. It would be like one of these modern remakes of these classic sci-fi films. I just don't want to see it.
Although Darabont might help. I'd be interested to read the screenplay.
Darabont would be the one good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I had trivia-wise.
Keys. Of course, While you were talking, or while we've been recording here, I did look up those. So we had talked about Hunger Games. That's Suzanne Collins. The Maze Runner is James Dashner is the author. And the one I was thinking of was the Divergent series. And that's by Veronica Roth. Those were definitely all influenced by this sort of
dystopian literature. Yeah.
I mean, I had started to put down Battle Royale, but
really,
well, just because it's
not that
dystopian,
crazy.
but it's not that crazy. It's not. This is more of a house, 1984, of course, Brave New World, Aldous Huxley.
Actually, you're totally relevant in saying Battle Royale because it's a dystopian film too. So.
Yeah. But I think it's more of a key to Hunger Games than it is from, to this or
well, it's definitely a key to that movie. It is more than a key to that movie. It is a ripoff.
It is a ripoff there.
Hunger Games is a ripoff of Battle Royale. But yes. So yeah, I agree with you there. I was going to say the book, obviously, is the biggest key.
Yeah,
because
of course.
Bradbury wrote the book in the 50s. And then I would go ahead and put 1984 in there as a key.
Of course.
This could be seen as a world that was a precursor to 1984. 1984 is this world 50 years later or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Easily. You could see that. Yes, I agree with that. I think that's a really cool progression to it. That you could see that happening. I had a flash while I was watching it. There was a line where the captain says, "We all have to be alike, Montag." And it kind of reminded me, and I suddenly got that Harrison Bergeron, the Harlan Ellison short story, where
that's lovely.
Where everyone in society is brought to the lowest common denominator. So tall people have to wear weights around their neck, and smart people have to have the thing in their ear that disrupts their thoughts every 30 seconds, that blasts weird sounds, so that we all have to be alike. This whole kind of, and that's another, I think, trope of dystopias, is trying to keep everybody in society on the same plane. Even though you may have a caste system, which most dystopians do, you still want the proletariat, the workers, the whatever, to stay in this niche sort of thing. We all have
Did you say Ellison?
Yeah, Harlan Ellison.
No, that's Kurt Vonnegut.
Wrote Harrison Bergeron?
Kurt Vonnegut wrote Harrison Bergeron.
Oh, okay. Then it was mine.
But you're right. That story is a great key to this, by the way.
Yeah.
Handicapping individuals so that everyone's equal. Yeah. I love that story.
And in 84, the handicap comes from the overall societal pressure, whether it's the war or the economics or the literature or lack thereof, the propaganda, all of that keeps these people all level, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So in Montag's world, it is this huge conspiracy theory, and it's the opposite. It's the propaganda keeping you up and happy and with the cousins, and we're all one big happy family, and we all must love each other, kind of attitude. So very similar to the other Bradbury that we did, the one in Illustrated Man. And actually, I had that in my keys because the aesthetic kind of reminded me of that one, the Veld in Illustrated Man. When they're in the future and it's a sexless kind of marriage and the kids have the playroom and all of that. It's that it could have been a component of this.
It seems like that the Illustrated Man could have dystopian elements in it, either in the overall or in the individual stories.
Yeah, but definitely that individual story made me feel like there was the same kind of aesthetic.
Yeah, I could see that as a key.
Yeah.
And the Bradbury connection as well. You've got me preoccupied now because I'm trying to think of a Harlan Ellison, because I'm sure there's a Harlan Ellison out there that would also be very similar to this.
Well, he had dystopian stories. Isn't I Have No Mouth, but I'm a Scream?
But I'm a Scream, yes. I was thinking that, yeah.
That was a dystopian society. So I think he had a few. I've got on my list, I still have to watch the new one that came out called Silo, which is, again, that kind of dystopian sort of look, trying to keep a society in a small microcosm.
It's
kind of
great. Now that's one I can get on board for, especially the novel Wolf that it's based on. That one was a good book.
Okay. What about you, Keith? Keith?
I mean, that was basically all I had. You mentioned Kubrick, and I was going to say him because parts of this remind me of him. I think it's the color, because there's some bright color in it and some unique shots in it that just remind me. I mean, it's a very indulgent film. It's like Truffaut's like saying, "Hey, look, this is what I can do." Like when the opening, instead of having written credits, he does everything audibly, because that's ties into the books or the movie's ending where everybody is reciting books. And he does these jarring like close-ups on these antennas and then the background colors are like red, yellow, and blue or whatever, and green. And it's a very strange and indulgent opening sequence to me.
Yeah.
That's
I do think
Kubrick.
It sets up. It's a very Kubrick. That's a good comparison. I think cinematically it does. He also does, the sped up fire engine down the road with the loud siren and Bernstein stuff happening a lot. Those intercuts happen a lot. That's interesting because also Clockwork, we talk about dystopian societies.
True.
And the Clockwork Orange is one of those. So there you go. Segueing a bit, I wrote some stuff that is the similarities to each of them, or some of the things they have in common, like that retro 50s aesthetic that's in this and in 1984, from the dialed phones to the screens on the walls that are constantly on, sort of thing, much more so in 84 than in this, but they're always there in this. They're prevalent in this. The quasi-Nazi sort of mentality of the ruling class. In this one, they have that weird kind of chest salute thing they do, and in 1984, it's the prisoner sort of salute that they give each other.
How would you classify that? You said retro something?
Retro 50s view of the future. So setting... it happens a lot. I don't
know how to list that as a key. I'm trying to figure it out.
It happens a lot in 60s science fiction.
Okay.
And even to 1970, obviously in UFO. In UFO, the aesthetic of it, they still have they're these funky princess phones, but they still have dials. And they still have little things they put in their ears that they have to listen to. Early, the pilot, the cage for Star Trek had paper coming out of the console.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And so we were projecting the future, but we were thinking of the future from a 60s or 50s perspective, trying to imagine what the future would look like, and we didn't get it right.
Anachronisms. Does
that make sense?
Science fiction.
Sort of. The fact of keeping the populace down, or we talked about a little bit, but it really hit me in 451 when she says, "I got you a new gift, and it's the new razor, and it's a razor that's with a flat blade razor." And she goes, "Can I throw the other one away?" And the other one's electric. "So can I throw the old one away?" she says. So let's get rid of electricity and let's go more primitive on it. Okay. And I thought it was very interesting that also tied into 84 as a key, because in 84, he's trying to find razor blades.
Right.
That's the big deal that everybody's talking about when he's setting up the whole, we're low on everything like sugar and chocolate. The chocolate ration is going to be increased, that sort of thing. Lack of reading in both. Reading is considered essentially a crime sort of thing. You can read something, but in 84 that you can't trust anything you read. In this, if you read anything that's not a comic, because that's the only thing they ever show Montag or anybody else reading, are these black and white comics kind of thing. They're never reading a printed word, which I thought was interesting, except in the dossiers. The dossiers look like print. So I thought that was kind of interesting to do it. And
Strange
book burning was
costumes,
awfully
strange set pieces, strange vehicles. But it's like you
yes.
said, even when they even when they try to get something right, sometimes it has, like you said, that retro feel to it, or it has a
Yeah.
dial on it or something just that's so outdated these days that it seems strange then. But
Mm-hmm.
the vehicle really bothered me. The fire truck really bothered me.
I
You
could
can't tell. It looks like a parade float, and they're all just standing on it.
Sort of. Yeah, I could see that. Moving on.
Sure.
We are going to go to 1984. It was directed by Michael Radford. It was written by Michael Radford, based on the novel by George Orwell. It came out in 1984. You had not seen this one before, and it's not your favorite, you said. What did you think of it overall, though?
I thought visually it's more compelling than 451 was. I liked 451 because it has a more hopeful ending. I put off watching this movie, well, until I watched it the other day. So it's been a long time. Because when I read this book in high school, I was like, this is boring. I mean, I know what it's saying and I know what it's about, but it just doesn't interest me. So
interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
It's got zombie. It doesn't have zombies in it. So,
okay.
If it had zombies in it, maybe. And first of all, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Who the fuck is Michael Radford?
Oh, same. I have no idea.
Exactly. How the hell did he get this directing gig? I've got that Hal Ashby, Milos Forman, and Francis Ford Coppola were all asked to direct, but declined. Hugh Hudson wanted to direct it, but was turned down for being unknown. However, he had done Chariots of Fire and Greystoke, which were both well-respected movies. So he wasn't unknown. Why did Michael Radford get this gig over Hugh Hudson?
Good
Michael
question.
Radford has done nothing I've ever heard of.
And he did The Postman, which what's his name actually won the Oscar for, the Italian guy. He did the other one, Venice. He did Merchant of Venice, a good version of it in the early 2000s or somewhere in there. But this, I have in my notes, this was like his third movie, according to IMDb.
Yeah. It's like, how did he get this movie?
And he was a TV director prior to that.
Okay.
So I'm not certain, unless he could have somehow. The first thing
it was his screenplay.
Is,
he actually helped do the screenplay. So,
the first thing that come to mind is maybe he came with money. Maybe he had some, like, my father-in-law or brother or backing or banker or whatever. And so he could, because to get this cast, which was really strong, and this kind of aesthetic and control scenically and everything else was pretty impressive. I agree with you. I love the aesthetic of this movie because I think it's exactly what I saw when I was reading the novel.
Exactly.
And
it's
again,
very grim.
And we've mentioned it before. I think we both took the high school class, which was so compelling, and I wish they still had it, called Utopian Literature. And you had to read like 16 novels in the 9 weeks of the class. And
I don't remember having to read that many, but.
Well, they were a lot because that's where I read Brave New World, Utopia, 1984. Several of these all came from that.
Right.
And I always remembered this. You said it was boring. To me, I compare this a lot to A Clockwork Orange because I had to keep going to the back to like the lexicon or whatever as I was reading it to understand what he was writing about. Because this one had newspeak all the way through it. So you had that double plus ungood.
Clockwork Orange was one of the books in that class too, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clockwork had all of the slang, that kind of pseudo Japanese slang that he was using or whatever. And so this was very similar to that. To me, it was a hard read. It was also extraordinarily depressing.
Right.
I mean, there is no hope from the beginning of this novel and film all the way through to the end.
Well,
There
and
is
I had this conversation with you like 40 years, 30 years ago. I don't know, about the movie The Sergeant with Jack Webb.
yeah, where he was the DI.
Okay,
Right?
whatever it's called. I just hated that fucking movie because I have this huge rebellious spirit in me. And when people
Yeah.
tell me what to do, I don't want to do it. And so to watch a movie where that's all they do, I'm like, I can't deal with this because I would just say, shoot me.
Well, pretty much,
Yeah.
and but to me, 1984 has always been the ultimate dystopian novel. I think pseudo utopian is Brave New World. That would be my other one, Aldous Huxley. But this one is so, and especially now in 24 from 1984, from whenever he wrote it. I can't remember when it was written. Right now, I don't
It was
have it
at
in my
the
notes.
turn of the century, I think. No.
But
It was written in the 40s. Wait a
in the
minute. I'll look
40s,
it up.
because it was after World War II. It was
Yeah,
after
it
World War
was.
II.
You're right.
But the thing being, it was written in 48, I think.
There you go.
But the this to me is where society could go, easily could go. And you see it today. We were just talking about the libraries in Florida and everything else. You could see this happening.
It was published in 1949. So
okay. And I wrote down the key tenets that came out of it that I always say, dystopian literature, where society could go, a black, bleak, oligarchical society sort of thing. The things that came out of the novel that are also in this movie are grip of fear, absolute conformity, continuous surveillance, organized hatred, and ceaseless war. So look at America in 2024. I mean, that's scary.
yeah.
I mean, all of those things are there. It's just how oppressive can they become, sort of thing. And how are we going to fight back to them rather than let them shoot us in the head, Tim? Sort of thing. I mean, this movie's 40 years old and it's still got a lot to say about our world and what we're doing.
The movie's not that old, is it?
Yeah, it came out in 84.
Oh, yeah, it is 40 years old. You're right. It'll be 40 years old next year.
Yeah.
But the book is the more important thing, and that was even older. So that's like, what?
Yeah.
80 years old, close to it?
Yeah. What about scenes in this
Orwell
one?
had the vision and saw this stuff, and we're still seeing it today.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with all the media saturation we have.
I mean, the novel and in this, the biggest keys you have to take from it, and there's too many to list, but are everything that came from Europe in World War II. From the color saturation or lack of color to the refugees, to the rationing, to the war effort, to all the propaganda, to the uniforms, everything is so influenced.
When I think of this movie, propaganda is the word that comes to mind immediately.
Oh, yeah. Well, that was his key factor because he even stated post novel that was one of the key factors of any society in controlling its people is propaganda. And Hitler showed that. Mussolini showed that, so yeah, there's that.
Scenes. I mean, clearly the scene that's going to stick out to me the most is room. What's that number? Room
101.
101, where he gets the cage attached to his face with the hungry rat in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's going to be my number one scene right there.
I'm sure it would be. Yeah. I actually have three.
I am the horror half of this podcast, remember?
I have three, and they're all in that same kind of last half of the movie. The rats definitely would be one. The torture in general.
The torture is horrible.
And just the way that Burton plays it. And the fact that John Hurt is, you can see the spittle in his teeth and everything. Right. He is obviously working it, man. It is really good.
Well, I think John Hurt is probably one of the most underrated actors out there. He's just phenomenal.
Always.
And from
Always
what I
has been.
understand, and I'll get to it in casting, no one else was ever in mind for the part except for him.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
And the other one that got me was the capture betrayal scene. I think is so pivotal story-wise, but also so well filmed and done, because we actually almost breathe there with both of them being totally nude, looking out the window at the woman who's humming. He has stated before she is singing a song that's written by a machine. And how can she make it sound so beautiful? And he's complimenting how beautiful she is. And though Julia is going, well, her hips are a meter wide. And he goes, it's not the beauty on the outside. It's the beauty on the inside. And then all of a sudden they're busted. And they come in and they have to stand back to back naked. And it's just horrible. And they throw the little coral glass ball, what do you call it? Thing. And then
Paperweight.
Cyril walks in. Yeah. And then Charrington walks in and you go, oh my God, been set up this entire time.
Yeah.
So it was just so good.
Don't they find like a hole in the wall behind the picture or something?
Yeah. The picture has Big Brother's camera on the other side of it. And he's
Right.
been watching and listening to them the whole time.
Right.
Yep. But you knew it. I mean, when the first thing almost that Winston writes down is, I hate her. I should turn her in, blah, blah, blah. They're always watching. There is no hope. You know, it's all this. I mean, he knows. And later on, when the O'Brien is interrogating him, he goes, you've always known. All I want you to say, Winston, is what you've always known. You know, it's just like, God, this society sucks.
Right. That's why I hate it. I don't want to be, I don't want to have anything to do with it.
I don't want to live here anymore.
I will probably never watch this movie again. And I love Richard Burton and I love John Hurt. So
it's oppressive. It's a very oppressive movie. From that whole opening, I want to put that down too as a favorite scene. The way they do the exposition, that's a great exposition dump at the beginning, with just all of them watching and hearing this propaganda, and then the camera just doing all of this
their faces.
Reactionary shots to all of them, panning over them. We've talked in the past about how you introduce your lead characters is really important. And it's very interesting that he chose to introduce them that way. O'Brien and Winston and Julia, all three we see in this crowd and at different times. And are they making eye contact or not? And are they the ones we're supposed to be looking for? I guess John Hurt's the star. But they've not had a bit of dialogue.
Yeah, as far as the allegory, it's him basically saying everyone's the same.
Yeah,
that's why he shows them all out there in a sea of faces.
And the fear you see in John Hurt, afraid to react, and then he reacts. Or you see in Julia, she does, and suddenly she does get passionate, and she's going, burn them, kill them, and gets into it. You see O'Brien look behind him at Winston, like he's in front of him, but also I'm keeping an eye on you even though you're behind me, kind of thing. So I even wrote in my notes, the entire plot can be summed up in the opening 5 minutes, even before the credits.
And I clearly think she's acting. She's just doing that because she knows it's what they want her to do. And I think that Winston is far more intelligent than he is playing to be as well, because he knows that all the propaganda shit he's putting out there is bullshit. That's just his job.
Yep.
So
that's why I'm sure the ministry has to really pay, or the what do they call them? The council, the circle, the ruling class is called something, and I can't remember right now. The inner circle. I'm sure the inner circle has to pay particular attention to people who work at the Ministry of Truth, because they're literally lying every day. What they do is write lies. Right.
Chocolate raisins.
Or whatever. And they're unpersoning, what they call unpersoning people, so that they never existed, which is what O'Brien tells him at the end. And then you'll be wiped away. You won't exist anymore. Never, ever, anywhere. It's like, golly.
Yeah, take me away.
Yeah. Tim wants some Calgon. Yeah.
I have a little bit of background.
Yeah.
Sonia Orwell, George Orwell's widow, signed the contract to allow this movie to be made December of 1980 while she was in the hospital. 9 days later, she died. She wanted to have full artistic control over the production, but in the end relinquished this. Maybe that's how Bradford got in it. Maybe he was the one that was talking to her.
That's what I mean. If he had the rights from the estate, that would make a sense too.
That may
You'd
be
able to say, and it's my show. Yeah.
She wanted artistic control, but in the end relinquished it and agreed to the terms and conditions of the contract and signed it. It took a lot of persuading before Ms. Orwell eventually agreed for Rosenblum to produce this movie, and only under the stipulation that no futuristic science fiction special effects be used to tell the story. She apparently hated the 1956 version with Edmund O'Brien and Jan Sterling, which is why I chose this version. She also was appalled when she heard David Bowie wanted to turn the book into a rock musical. That, to me, is more interesting. Well, and I'll tell you why. If you've ever listened to the CD Diamond Dogs, the album or whatever you want to call it, Diamond Dogs is basically an homage to 1984. He even does a song called 1984 that Tina Turner remade on her private dancer album in 1984. That's two of my keys right there, are Bowie and Tina Turner, for covering this song that Bowie wrote in 74. So Bowie was already on that mindset. It's very, very Roger Waters, who is another key. I like the idea of turning this more into a musical, because to me, that gives me something a little, I don't know, it's not less depressing, but it gives a little more variety than just the grim and drab and dreary, if that makes sense.
Agreed.
Like, I like The Wall better than this movie because Pink Floyd does the music. Very similar, though. So, anyway,
that's a key.
Yeah, I'm releasing keys. I'm vomiting keys out by accident because I'm striving for things to make this movie redeeming to me. Anyway, do you want me to go on to cast, or did you have some other stuff you wanted to talk about as far as background or scenes?
No. In this one, I mean, those are the three biggest ones. So it was definitely, for me, it was definitely like the opening. I thought it was a microcosm for the whole freaking story and movie. Then the whole torture and just the way Burton is. Every scene he's in is so dynamic. But then John Hurt, same way. But then the rats, of course, you always remember the rats.
And we'll get to it in cast, but Burton's got a Brando-esque caliber to him. I mean, any scene he's going to be in, you are immediately going to go straight to him. You know what I mean? Yes. He's just that caliber of an actor, even though he was having a lot of difficulty in this film.
For me personally, I think I've always liked Burton better than Brando.
Oh, okay.
As an actor, I still think he is just so strong and so incredible. I mean, even in Julius and Cleopatra and all that stuff, even in those bad
Anthony and Cleopatra.
Well,
you mean the movie Cleopatra?
He was Anthony.
The movie, and Cleopatra. It was The movie was Cleopatra. You're right.
I thought, he was great in that, even though I don't like that film at all. I thought he was really good.
I can't even remember it.
So I think he's really strong as an actor, and I really like the way he plays O'Brien, because O'Brien is a total believer in the system. There's no doubt that he is total, and this whole false flag kind of thing that he does in the novel and in the movie, where he's the one that actually gives him the Goldstein book, the manifesto, and everything to hook him, to get him hooked in. And as soon as he turns, he's right there to arrest him. It's just like, damn.
Yeah, he's a dick.
Yeah. But you were talking about the incredible John Hurt.
John Hurt he is amazing. I mean, both these actors are amazing. We know John, of course, from Alien more than anything, because that's a movie that fits in our both our genres, really, and we've covered it. But he's also done other incredibly diverse roles, including the Elephant Man, which he was just under pounds of makeup in, basically.
That's the one that gets me, though. His voice, his body language, through the makeup, everything he does to bring Elephant Man to life is amazing.
Yeah. And then he was in Midnight Express as well, which I believe was an Oscar movie.
Yes.
It had an actor in it named Brad. I can't think of his last name. He died of AIDS, but he was a great underrated actor. Anyway, John was the only actor that producer Simon Perry and director Michael Radford ever considered to play this role, Winston Smith.
Interesting.
And I think it's because he has well, first of all, he's a high caliber actor, but second of all, he's kind of meek, and you want Winston to be meek. Does that make sense?
Somewhat, yeah.
I don't want to say he's frail, but he's got a humanity to him that can also be a vulnerability, if that makes sense. Anyway, I think that's really all I have to say about him as far as this movie, though, because, like I said, there was no other actors considered.
Well, he was in Snowpiercer. He's Ollivander in the Harry Potter movies.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's done a ton of stuff.
But the big thing, I think, what you're getting at, or what I think, is that, and this is more of I think being faithful to the novel or whatever, which is you need to feel like Winston is cursed from the beginning.
Right.
He's got no hope. And John Hurt does kind of give you that. He gives you that weak sort of, as much as he fights, it won't make any difference. Whereas if you cast like a Brad Pitt or a Tom Cruise or somebody like that, you'd think,
that's him to be a hero.
Yeah, that's our hero, and they're going to be the hero. When you see John Hurt, even in Alien, you go, I don't know if he's going to make it.
No, I think something's going to come out of
something's going to come out of his chest.
Right.
So yeah,
Richard Burton, back to him. I equate him with like a Brando, but we also, of course, equate him with those British actors that drink that are all good, like him, Peter O'Toole, Oliver Reed, all came from the same class. The only difference is Brando's vice was food and not booze.
Yeah,
but they all had their demons, so to speak. I remember Richard Burton the most from Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I love that movie, and he absolutely knocks my socks off whenever I watch it. Of course, he also did The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, as well as Equus. He was the fifth choice for the role of O'Brien. Are you familiar with others that were considered?
No, not at all.
Yeah, you're going to like this. A lot of these are actors we've either talked about or seen this season. One is Paul Scofield.
Ooh.
Yeah.
I could have seen that.
Yeah, we had mentioned him in other movies being up for roles. Another is Rod Steiger, who we have already seen twice this season.
Yeah.
But Rod Steiger would have probably been too intense. I mean, we were talking about his intensity in roles, and Burton downplays this big time.
Well, and I met Burton through a lot of, or not met, but found out about, took notice of Burton through all the Shakespeare that he did.
Right.
Because he was like Petruchio in Taming of the Shrew, and he did The Tempest, and he did Midsummer Night's Dream, and he did all of these Shakespeare movies. And I remember him in Beckett and a couple of other films. But I think, again, great casting, because it's the opposite. A Rod Steiger would have made me immediately think this guy's a bad guy.
Exactly. Yeah,
whereas Richard Burton doesn't. You think that when he does kind of do that flip and give him the book and say, I think you might find this interesting.
Right.
You think, oh my gosh, he's going to help him. And even when Charrington turns on him, you think, oh, well, then O'Brien will come to their rescue somehow. O'Brien's going to help him. And no, not at all. I agree. I think Steiger would have been too dark. I
equated Steiger to Jack Nicholson when we watched the Illustrated Man.
Yep.
And like Stephen King said, when you see Jack Nicholson in The Shining, you immediately know he's the villain.
Yeah.
So I think it would have been similar with Steiger.
Completely
Another person
agree.
considered for this role, who I think would have been quite interesting, is Sean Connery.
That would have been interesting.
Because you don't see him as a villain. You see him as a good guy.
He's always a hero. Yep.
Yeah. So it would have been interesting to see that.
That would have been interesting.
And then one other person which would have been able to pull it off because it was prior to 1990 is Anthony Hopkins.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying? After 1990, I don't think he could have done it.
No, after
Lecter.
Silence and after Bounty, I don't think he could have done it. Both of those were
Villainous
was
roles.
in his villain roles, and we suddenly saw a side of him we hadn't, and a side that's hard to forget or get out of. Yeah. So I think Burton was overall the best choice of all those. Connery would have been a second. I could agree. But I do think Burton just brings such gravitas to his role and the way he does, that first big meeting. I mean, we don't meet him till what, an hour into the freaking movie?
It's a ways.
And it's that scene in the office where he's serving him wine. And, and the big thing when he gets up and goes back to the screen and flips it, and Winston has the line of, "You can turn it off?" And he goes, "Yes, there are certain privileges that come with the office." And you suddenly realize, oh my God, they never turn their screens off. We've never seen one off. So they can't.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. But yeah, a great entrance to that character.
Paul Scofield was unable to play the part. Apparently he may have been cast, but he broke his leg. And couldn't play it. It was Richard Burton's final movie before his death in 1984. He died in August at the age of 58. He was in poor health during most of the filming, had horrible difficulties remembering his lines, and sometimes had to film scenes dozens of times to get it right. There's a scene in O'Brien's apartment where he is talking to Winston, and he took a record 41 takes to say this speech without fumbling.
Wow.
That's harsh, especially if you're not him and you're someone else waiting.
But you don't see it in the performance at all.
No, you don't.
I saw no frailty. I saw no weakness. Those scenes when it's just like almost, I love the way the director did it, because it's almost like you're from Winston's POV of him sitting beside the torture table, just talking to him. Those scenes are so intense, and one shot usually. It's a hold shot on him.
Well, and it's just poor little John Hurt, all beat up, strung up, and missing teeth, and yeah. Julia was played by Suzanna Hamilton. I don't know anything about her except that she was in Out of Africa and Tess, which is a Polanski film.
It is.
Don't know anything about her. I mentioned earlier that Captain Beatty from Fahrenheit 451 was played by Cyril Cusack, and this he plays Charrington. So we get to see a little bit more of what Cyril is all about as far as his skills. I think he's much
he's
better
great in this.
Yeah,
so underscored in this. The opposite of what the captain.
No, really, I've said he was Dr. Bombay from Bewitched. That was my comparison.
But in this, he's much more restrained, much more secretive, and again, he's part of this whole entrapment, false flag sort of thing they've got going, because it's his apartment that's above his store in the proletariat area. I did have a note that Suzanna Hamilton would have to have agreed to full frontal, because there's several of those in this. I'm like, okay, then.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm surprised John Hurt didn't do it, because, I mean, there was no shame so much in this. I mean, it was definitely all out there.
Well, he did do full back.
He did. Yeah. And it's just that's probably not his choice as much as it was the studios, because they just didn't show men's frontal back then.
Right. Right. Not in 84.
No. Well, if they did, it was a very artsy foreign film, and that was it.
There you go.
Gregory Fisher, who I don't really know, played Parsons. I've got to know that he was in Love Actually, which I haven't seen in a bazillion years, so I don't remember him.
He was very interesting, and I liked his character. I don't remember him that much in the book, but he is such a company man at the beginning, the way they establish anything. He's so excited about the chocolate ration, and he's trying to find razor blades just like Winston is, and all of that, and such a supporter of the war. And then suddenly he's thrown into the same cell as Winston,
and he turns on him.
Well, he doesn't turn on him. He says, but he has that.
He starts saying, "This guy's worse than me. Take him. Take him."
Oh yeah. I mean, once it comes down to it,
yeah.
But even before that, he has that horrible story of the person that turned him in was his daughter, and not that I'm mad at her. She turned me in. He goes, she's the one that made me realize that I'm a traitor, and she's the one that showed me how wrong I was. And I'm like, oh my God, he's already half broken. Yeah. Anyway, this is
yeah, it's wild.
It's bad.
As far as awards, it was nominated for a BAFTA for production design. I'm really kind of shocked that that's all BAFTA nominated it for, because it did win several awards on small festivals. So many small festivals that I did not even put any in here because it was just too many, and I didn't want to list them. But it is not on the list of 1001 movies you must see before you die. And even though it's not a particular favorite of mine, or that it doesn't interest me that much, I could see where this one could land on that list as opposed to Fahrenheit 451.
Totally agree with you.
So I'm kind of confused as to why it didn't. Like I said, just because I don't like this movie doesn't mean it's not a good film. It's just not my personal taste, for lack of better words.
I took so many things, and I'd love to maybe challenge the viewers or listeners out there of another movie that plays with language as well as this one does. There's lots of movies where they have their own dialect, or they have their foreign speak, or whatever, but taking the English language and abusing it, I think the only corollary I could come up with was Clockwork.
That's what I was thinking.
But thought crime, ungood, unperson, all of the rhetoric,
double speak,
the double speak in general, and newspeak, which is the political arm of double speak. The Ministry of Truth, which is a place where they create propaganda, the Ministry of Love, which is where they torture dissidents and rebels and everything, that kind of. And it goes back to the whole corollary of what Orwell was trying to say, which is they will convince you that wrong is right and right is wrong. They will convince you that 4 + 4 is 5 if they say it is. Mm-hmm. And if 2 days from now, 4 + 4 is, 2 + 2 is 9, it still is. And you will believe it. And that's so terrifying to me, that whole concept. I wrote down so many notes of just language in this, of like the one friend who they're sitting at lunch, and he turns to him and he goes, "It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? The destruction of words." And he talks about how the dictionary is getting smaller.
Oh yeah.
Each edition, and that, I'm sure to you as a writer, I mean, hearing a phrase like that is that's just like, horrifying.
It's insane. It's insane.
Propaganda lines, the ninth 3-year, in our ninth 3-year plan, da, 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 da. And you're like, oh my God, how long has this been going on? The slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. I have constant propaganda. Freedom is the freedom to say 2 + 2 is 4. That's what Winston writes in the journal.
Yeah, he keeps a journal hidden.
And then I've got this thing about, it's very, very telling. I think this movie should be re-released this year, because in 2024, think about this, it's because the whole novel and the movie is a middle class that doesn't know it's shrinking, but it is, thinking they're in the right and they're in control, looking down on the proles and the immigrants and the lesser people than them, and always hoping to get into the inner circle of the ultra elite and the rich and the powerful. And welcome to America in 2024. Same exact thing. We just don't have the oppression that they have yet.
I was wondering, I don't have a way of doing it fast enough, but I strongly suspect this book is on the banned books in Florida.
I would guarantee it is.
I was looking real quick, but I couldn't find it because it does it by like states, and I found Alabama. I didn't find Florida. Anyway, yeah, I mean, because this book is a history of being banned.
I've got Parsons' quote of, "Thought crime is so insidious, isn't it? My daughter turned me in. I didn't even realize." That's what he said. Because he thinks he's guilty of thought crime, even though all he's guilty of is literally thinking. And two more quotes, and then we'll go on, because I'm sorry. This is directly from the book, and it's also in the movie. The war is never meant to be war. The war is only meant to be continuous. The hierarchy of society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. Again, a lesson for our times kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
One of O'Brien's best lines: "All the confessions made here are true. They're total truth. We make them believe before we destroy them, and then we erase them." You go, holy shit.
It's like, then what's the point?
Right. And that's the futility. Remember the last 3 chapters of the book, when Winston is so being tortured in 101, are just like John Hurt's face. It's like, then why are you even asking me? If you just go ahead and kill me. And he goes, that's not the point. We have to change you first. We have to totally destroy you before we kill you. And he even says, and put a bullet in your head or something like that. Because there was a version, they did an adaptation of this, I vaguely remember, and I think it was a TV movie. But at the end of it, O'Brien releases Winston and says, "You're free, because, you said I love Big Brother," and all of that. And Winston, and you can tell that Winston is totally broken. He does love Big Brother. And O'Brien takes him to a long hallway and shows him down the hallway, and he's going toward the door at the end. And before he gets there, this guard comes in and shoots him in the head. So at least in this one, Winston lives, although he's a total, drone of the state now. But at least he lives.
I don't know. They kind of play it to where it could be either way.
Yes, but that's, I think, all in John Hurt. It's all in his face, because his little line is, "I love you," when he's looking at Big Brother. When he looks at Big Brother on the screen, he turns around and says, "I love you," but he's crying.
Right.
And it's just in his face. You're going, does he really or not? How did he get out if he doesn't? And I've also played with the thought of, was that really true? And so I went back, and yes, it is in the book. And the name of the cafe was the same, the poem, "Beneath the Wandering Willow Tree" or Willow Elm.
Yeah,
or something.
the one he's sitting at the end.
Yeah, that's the same
cafe.
Name as the cafe.
Oh, okay.
Because when I saw it, I thought, oh, that's the poem that he and Julia kept saying. So maybe he is like he's in a fantasy world right now. Maybe he's psychotic or whatever, or, he's still in the prison. This is just what he's imagining. Same way he was imagining sitting on the beautiful outside green pasture with O'Brien, while O'Brien's telling him, "Why are you here, Winston?"
Well, I think that John Hurt thought this movie needs at least just a little bit of hope at the end, so I'm going to give it to him.
Please, just a little glimmer of something for
Right.
Tim. Tim needs some hope.
Because otherwise, Tim's out. He's bored.
Shoot me. Just shoot me.
Yeah. So, did you have any trivia before we move on to keys?
Not really. I do love the aesthetics of this movie a lot. I like the design, the costume design, the gray, bleak quasi blueness of everything. I love the fact that the only color, vibrancy of color compared to 451 that we see is when they're in the woods outside and see the hills in green and all of that. And I love the fact that all of the monitors are in sepia tone. They're not in black and white. They're in that kind of brownish sepia kind of rust color for all the war footage, all the even the flag and all the pageantry and stuff is still done in that sepia look.
Yeah.
So
I have a very long quote I took out of IMDb. And before I read it or read parts of it, do you know anything about the controversy of the soundtrack of this film?
No, there was.
Yeah. Richard Branson's Virgin Films, the production company bankrolling the movie. So there's your money right there.
There's your money.
Wanted a commercially viable pop act to compose the music to increase its potential. Originally, they approached Bowie, who had used, the novel's inspiration for his album Diamond Dogs, but he wanted too much money for the job. They opted instead for the Eurythmics, who initially turned down the offer, but later accepted. Michael Radford was unaware of the plan and had already hired Dominic Muldowney to compose the entire score for the Virgin Films. He exercised their right to final cut. Virgin Films exercised their right to final cut and replaced Muldowney's score with the Eurythmics score for theatrical release. I knew this was going to shock you. Some of Muldowney's score remain, particularly the state anthem, Oceana, 'Tis for Thee. Radford was displeased with this development and retained by withdrawing this movie for consideration for BAFTA. That's why it wasn't up for awards with BAFTA. Okay.
He pulled it. It makes sense.
He pulled it. When the movie did win the Evening Standard Award for Best Film of the Year, Radford used his acceptance speech at the nationally televised ceremony to denounce the Eurythmics' involvement. The Eurythmics released a statement that said they were unaware of the dispute and would not have accepted the commission had they known it was against Radford's consent. So the Eurythmics backed off and said, we had no idea this little feud was going on between you and the studio. But so Virgin had Eurythmics and he had a composer and they were like at odds big time.
Maybe that's why Radford didn't do a lot after this.
Maybe. You know what I mean? You've got a very valid point there.
If he was blackballed, that's probably why.
Right.
I mean, you don't stand up to Richard Branson and all of that and say, no, I want it my way.
Right. Now, to give you some hope for the end of this turmoil, in 1984, the complete Muldowney score was finally released as a double limited edition CD. 1984, the music of Oceana. In 1999, to commemorate the movie's 15th anniversary, a DVD was released featuring the Muldowney score, but this version went quickly out of print. Later, both Blu-ray releases, the Twilight Time and Criterion, offered the option of choosing between the Eurythmics or the Muldowney soundtracks. So there are two scores to this film.
Wow.
And I didn't, I think I saw the one that was just the score. I didn't hear Eurythmics in this movie. I would recognize Annie Lennox.
Oh, so. Yeah, I didn't. And honestly, other than the Oceana anthem, I don't really remember the music in this movie.
I don't think there's a lot.
It wasn't that instrumental.
It's more tonal, I think.
To the story. So I think it was
all
smart.
Releases of the movie jointly credit both artists, Eurythmics and Muldowney.
I will have to look. I'm going to take a note and look that up. The Eurythmics.
Well, it's fascinating because of this was around the same time that re-release of Metropolis came out with all the different pop artists doing stuff, and Eurythmics was one of them. One last,
but that's totally different. Metropolis never had a score. Metropolis
it never had any sound. Yeah.
Right. So that's different.
Ironically enough, this is what I thought was funny. I put this at the end. The film's cast includes one Oscar winner and two Oscar nominees. The Oscar winner is Annie Lennox, and the nominees are Burton and Hurt. Because Annie Lennox won an Oscar
So
for Lord of the
wrong.
Rings, Return of the King, the music, the song,
So
Into the West.
wrong. That's just
That's
wrong.
hilarious that she has an Oscar and those two actors don't. That's crazy. Anyway,
So wrong.
keys. Most of my keys are music related.
Really?
I've already seen where I'm going.
I have several that are non. So the biggest one, of course, was the 1984 commercial shown at the Super Bowl only once, launching the Apple Macintosh computer. It's called 1984. You can find it now on YouTube and everything else, but it was huge and taken directly from this movie, or actually from the book, because I think the commercial came out before the movie. I'd have to look and see the months when the movie was released.
And it was literally the same year, and it was an Apple commercial.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And it was a very, very, very iconic Apple commercial showing this runner in color going through this whole black and white world where everybody is sitting and looking at the big screen and Big Brother and everything, and she hurls this sledgehammer into the screen, crashing it, and it reveals the Macintosh computer. It was the launch of Mac.
Wow, melodrama
big,
much.
Very big deal. I mean, Steve Jobs loved it, so
I don't know. What?
You go ahead. You got music.
I was just going to say, a lot of the movies we mentioned earlier when we were talking about Fahrenheit 451 would also apply to this movie, as far as like dystopian films, Maze Runner, Hunger Games, those things that you, Divergent, whatever. My biggest, I've already mentioned, is The Wall, because I think The Wall is a much better movie. Of course, it's also a lot of the reason why I like it better is the music, which is Pink Floyd. But I mean, there is a character in this that becomes like a fascist. I mean, in The Wall, that becomes like a fascist leader. And if I'm not mistaken, I think they do that same hand thing, don't they?
Theirs is the opposite.
Oh, it's the opposite. Okay.
This,
gotcha.
And in 1984, it's this. It's
okay.
pushed out against, and then they do pull in. So
right.
yeah, Boomtown.
But he
Rats
becomes
guy, right?
a totalitarian dictator in his mind, and
in his mind.
Yeah, it's all in his mind. But this movie, we could have done a double feature of the two. I think.
Well, I definitely think Alan Parker was. Bradford was influenced by Alan Parker. The Wall was before this movie.
The Wall came out in 79. Or no, actually, 79. The music came out in 79.
The movie came out in 82.
In 82,
and
okay.
This didn't come out to 84. So I think the influence is that this was influenced by The Wall.
Yeah.
And what he did. I've got the same as you. I've got a lot of the typical ones. So Brave New World, Clockwork Orange, all of those. But I've also got some of the ones that were similar in aesthetic and movie and feel, like Children of Men, another dystopian movie, very gray, very dark looking, very pseudo-British. I want to say all these movies feel very British, even though Fahrenheit 451 is in color and directed by a French person. It has a British feel for this. It's got
British actors in it. Yeah.
This definitely has a British European post-World War II feel to everything, just like The Wall does in aesthetic and look and, running through rubble and all of that.
Orwell was British, right?
Yes.
It's funny how all these films that are dystopian end up being British.
Maybe they don't like the government.
Maybe it's because there's not enough sunshine over there.
There's too much rain over here, lads. Dark City is another one that is that dystopian sort of feel to it.
I kind of like Children of Men, but I think it's because there's a resistance. And that
you're following the hero in that.
It gives you the conflict that I need for a movie to be more satisfying, I think, than to be less oppressive. Yeah,
this movie doesn't have a hero arc. Not really. I mean, it's the journal of Winston Smith. kind of thing. That's basically what this movie is. And it's not, oh, I've been shown a destiny and I need to do it. Even down to 451, his destiny is to rebel against the fireman and preserve literature somehow.
Right.
That's
and it's not just the
movie,
it's the book too. That's why I'm not a fan of the book either. So
true. Both book and they're both really good adaptations.
They're very good
source
adaptations. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you are, it's hopeless for Winston from the very beginning. And he knows it, he even writes it in his journal. There is no future for us. We will be caught. Eventually we will be found, so sad. I've got some obvious keys from an aesthetic and a visual, which is World War II, specifically Nazis and Germany and that whole feel, such an influence on this movie. And also parts of 451, but also communism, this whole communism in general, which is kind of what Orwell was speaking out against, because when he wrote the novel, he was talking about this whole socialistic sort of bad society, which is true. This is what socialism could descend to, if not kept in check by the people, sort of thing. So there's that influence.
I mentioned Diamond Dogs, the album by David Bowie.
Yeah.
And then Tina Turner went and covered the song 1984 in 1984, 10 years after that album. So but I don't know if you know much about Tina Turner. She was always more of a rock and roller. So she did a lot of stuff with like covers of the Stones or covers of David Bowie and stuff. So I think that's kind of cool. I have some stuff I lifted from IMDb. I mentioned The Wall already, and I mentioned that version of Giorgio Moroder's Metropolis, the Fritz Lang movie where he dubbed in all the pop music. And that movie alone is a key to this, not just the one that he did the music for, but the original silent film.
Very good point. Very, very good point.
Yeah, I mean, because it's like a dystopian film from 1920, whatever. We've covered that, actually.
Yep. Welcome to the machine. Welcome to the machine.
Right. Which is also a Pink Floyd song. How strange. But there were other movies in the 80s that came out that I had not considered, that IMDb considered, and it kind of blew me away. One of them is Terry Gilliam's Brazil.
I could see that.
Another is Blade Runner.
Yep.
Another is Halloween 3, Season of the Witch.
I'm not getting that one at all.
Well, I mean, they classify them under dystopian, Orwellian, and or Kafkaesque movies.
Kafka, I could definitely see for Halloween 3, but not for not dystopian. It's basically, unless Halloween is a dystopic holiday. My thing was that, from what I remember of it, is they were trying to turn the world into a dystopia because there's like he was maniacal corporation in it. Yeah. I could see that. There was also that other one. It was also with Brazil. I can't think of it right now. Sorry, but Brazil definitely. Brazil, I could definitely see as a dystopian sort of inspired.
And it's another movie I don't like.
It needs some work. To your point, if you're talking about dystopia, it's 12 Monkeys. Look at the world of 12 Monkeys before he goes back in time.
I'll give you 12 Monkeys, and I like that movie, but it's also because you've got a hero's journey in it.
Yep.
So
you got a hero's journey. Yep.
And even though it ends sadly, I still like it.
I've got one you might like and appreciate, which is Loki. Loki's aesthetic is like a combination of both of these movies. It's still that 50s retro future.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
They still have the office workers. They're still using rotary stuff. They still got this weird, pencils and staplers and stuff. But
and that Mrs. What's her name? That's just an old rotary phone cartoon thing.
Miss Manners.
Yeah.
So I could definitely see Loki as a key from this movie.
And then the only other one I lifted, and you should know this one because I've not even seen this movie, and it's V is for Vendetta.
V for Vendetta. Yep.
Or V for Vendetta. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And John Hurt was actually in that movie too.
Yes. Yeah. I've got a couple of just ones. One is, well, one of my notes says Fox News. Oh my God. It's the same as watching this. So that's true. But The Expanse, one of the first things that Julia brings to him is the coffee in the little packet and everything else. That's a huge deal in The Expanse because the lead character, Jim, is obsessed with good quality coffee, which is impossible to find in places in the galaxy or in the solar system. So he's always talking about coffee and the quality of coffee.
Interesting.
So, there was an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. It was a 2-part episode. I've got it somewhere. Hold on, let me check my notes real quick. It was called Chain of Command. And in it, Picard, the captain, is captured by Cardassians, and they torture him. And the whole purpose of the torture is for him to succumb by the end. And behind the torturer who's torturing him, behind him are 4 lights. And he wants him to say there are 5 lights. And the whole 2-part episode is this horrible, horrible mental and physical torture of Picard until at the very end, he's right before he's about to say there are 5 lights and totally break down. He's rescued. And the very last denouement is him in his quarters. He's recovering. It's obviously a couple of days after the incident, and Troy comes in to talk to him about it and how are you feeling and everything else. And she goes, I've read your report and I can't believe you had to endure that and da, da, da. And he goes, and they somehow get in the conversation, but the very last line is, you don't seem to understand why I'm upset, counselor. I saw 5 lights at the end. And you go, oh my God. And you realize that he was gone. He was totally broken. And same thing as Winston. I thought that had to be, they had to be using 84 for this.
What is that?
The episode's called Chain of Command. And it's a 2-part episode of Next Generation. It's brilliant. Tim, I know you don't like Next Generation, but it might be fun for you to watch. I think you would appreciate it. It's really,
when you said that, what's her name? Troy came in there and asked him how he felt. I was out.
Yeah.
I was like, no.
Well, she's the counselor. That's the times when she should be used.
I don't like her character at all.
And the last 2 I've got are just, language is so important to Orwell. I thought it was very interesting that 2 of his big phrases have become our phrases even today. Big Brother, and look out for Big Brother, or watch me, and Orwellian. That's now this whole genre is Orwellian. That's the named after him, ironically. So I thought those were 2 fitting.
Well, it's because there are a lot of films out there that use this premise. I mean, it's almost like you said, Mary Shelley, going back to what we started with today. Mary Shelley invented this, but it's really like Orwell really is the master of it, of course, and the one that people relate it to. And all these films we're talking about, these dystopian films, are little babies that were sprouted from Orwellian concepts.
Of course, all the keys come from there and from that, and it is a part of genre science fiction that I like. I like the subgenre of dystopians to see just but I'm like you. I'd much rather have a hero cycle in that. How do I fight against the oppression rather than I am just going to end up succumbing to it.
Right. So I think it's safe to say that we both would recommend these films.
Oh, God.
Like I said, just because I don't like them or I'm not a fan of them doesn't mean they're not good. They are definitely concepts and pieces that should be seen. So I guess that's all we're going to say today. We've run way too long, but that's because it's a double feature.
Double feature!
And we would like to thank all you folks out there for tuning in. And if you thought of something that we didn't think of, or if you thought of something we said that might have sparked some interest, please let us know in the comments below.
Please.
And while you're down there, subscribe and or like and rate us if you're listening to us and not watching us on YouTube. We would like to also tell you that we have other shows out there on YouTube as well as Patreon. Some of those Patreon shows are free. They are not subscription based. However, we do have some other episodes that are Star Trek centric or X-Files centric, where you can subscribe to a particular tier and help support us even further. And until next time, when I do believe we're going back into the world of the supernatural, imagine that. I will be seeing you, David.
I'll see you then, Tim.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Start the car, Johnny.